My landlord, bless his cotton socks, was a bit much. Overprotective doesn't quite cover it. He hovered. He fussed. He treated the apartment building like his personal ant farm, and we, the tenants, were his little specimens. I needed an outlet, a creative expression, a prank, and that's how it all started. Getting Danny DeVito into my apartment was a feat of engineering. He was surprisingly unwieldy. I wedged him through the doorway, narrowly avoiding a collision with the hallway's overly ornate and frankly hideous chandelier. The cutout wobbled precariously. I imagined my landlord witnessing this struggle, his brow furrowed in concern for the structural integrity of the building. I positioned Danny strategically in the kitchen, visible from the street. He leaned jauntily against the window, a silent cardboard observer of the world outside. I added a few props, a half-eaten bowl of cereal, a newspaper folded open to the crossword puzzle. It was important to maintain a sense of realism. My landlord appreciated the finer details. He was a stickler for appearances. He'd notice. Oh, he'd notice. I retreated to my living room, a silent spectator waiting for the main event. Showtime was about to begin. It wasn't long before his familiar figure appeared, ambling down the sidewalk. He paused outside my building, his gaze sweeping across the windows. Then, he stopped, dead in his tracks. His eyes locked onto Danny DeVito, standing proudly in my kitchen window. I watched from behind the blinds, stifling a giggle. His reaction was even better than I had imagined. His jaw dropped. His clipboard clattered to the ground. He blinked several times, as if trying to clear a glitch in the matrix. It was a masterpiece of bewilderment. Finally, he took a deep breath and marched into the building. "Good afternoon, Mr. Henderson," I chirped. "Is everything all right?" He stood there, his eyes darting between me and Danny. "I noticed you have a guest." "Oh, him? That's just my roommate, Daniel." The key to a successful prank was commitment. "I see," he said slowly. "Well, just remind Daniel about the building rules." I nodded solemnly, playing the role of the responsible tenant. "Of course, Mr. Henderson. I'll make sure Daniel is aware of the rules." I closed the door, leaning against it as a wave of laughter washed over me. Phase 1 of the prank was complete, and it was glorious. I peeked through the blinds again, watching as Mr. Henderson continued down the sidewalk. The image was too good to resist. I had to push it further. Mr. Henderson, bless his rule-abiding heart, took the Danny DeVito situation very seriously. The next day, a crisp, freshly printed copy of the building's regulations appeared slipped under my door. It was highlighted extensively. Sections pertaining to guest policies, noise levels, and proper garbage disposal were practically glowing neon yellow. I picked up the document, a smile playing on my lips. He'd even circled the clause about unauthorized pets, with a handwritten note in the margin. "Does Mr. DeVito shed?" I had to hand it to him. The man was thorough. I placed the rulebook on my kitchen counter, directly in Danny's line of sight, or rather, where his line of sight would be if he were a real person. I added a miniature pair of reading glasses to his face, perched precariously on his cardboard nose. It was a subtle touch, but I knew Mr. Henderson would appreciate the gesture. Later that day, I saw him peering through my window, his eyes scanning the apartment for any signs of rule-breaking. He seemed satisfied that Danny was diligently perusing the regulations. Mr. Henderson's next move was a stroke of pure, unadulterated paranoia. He installed security cameras in the hallway. Not just one camera, mind you, but 3, positioned strategically to capture every angle of my doorway. I guess he wanted to make sure Danny wasn't sneaking out after curfew or engaging in any illicit cardboard cutout activities. I watched from my peephole as he fiddled with the wiring, muttering to himself about deterrence and preventative measures. He even adjusted the angle of one camera so it pointed directly at Danny in the window. It was as if he expected the cardboard celebrity to suddenly spring to life and stage a daring escape. I had to stifle a laugh. The man was a walking, talking sitcom. He was taking the bait, hook, line, and sinker. And I was thoroughly enjoying the show. My neighbors, bless their curious souls, started to catch on. Whispers and giggles echoed in the hallway. People would slow down as they passed my apartment, peering in at Danny with a mixture of amusement and bewilderment. The prank was becoming a community event. One afternoon, Mrs. Higgins, the sweet old lady from across the hall, knocked on my door. She was holding a plate of freshly baked cookies. "These are for your friend?" she said, her eyes twinkling with mischief. I thought he might be getting homesick. I accepted the cookies graciously, thanking her for her thoughtfulness. We exchanged a knowing smile, a silent acknowledgement of the absurdity of the situation. Mr. Henderson's confusion reached its peak when he attempted to engage Danny in conversation. I was in my kitchen, pretending to wash dishes, when I heard a hesitant knock on my window. There he was, standing on the sidewalk, gesturing towards Danny. He cupped his hands around his mouth and called out, "Good morning, Mr. DeVito. Lovely weather we're having, isn't it?" I froze, biting my lip to keep from bursting into laughter. He waited patiently for a response, his face a picture of hopeful anticipation. Of course, Danny remained silent. He simply stared back at Mr. Henderson with his perpetually cheerful cardboard grin. Mr. Henderson's face fell. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Mr. DeVito, can you hear me?" Still no response. The bubble machines were a stroke of genius, if I do say so myself. I purchased 2 industrial-strength bubble makers, the kind used for children's parties and theatrical productions. I strategically placed them in the hallway outside my apartment, set on a timer to activate at random intervals throughout the day. The effect was delightfully chaotic. The hallway, normally a sterile, silent space, transformed into a whimsical wonderland of floating, iridescent orbs. Bubbles drifted lazily through the air, bouncing off walls and clinging to the ornate and hideous chandelier. Mr. Henderson's reaction was predictable, yet still incredibly entertaining. He emerged from his apartment, his face a mask of utter bewilderment. He swatted at the bubbles, his eyes darting around as if searching for the source of this sudden, inexplicable phenomenon. Mr. Henderson's investigation into the bubble incident was a masterclass in overreaction. He interrogated each tenant, his questions becoming increasingly bizarre. He demanded to know if anyone had seen any suspicious activity or unusual devices in the hallway. He even questioned Mrs. Higgins about her baking habits, convinced that the bubbles were somehow related to her cookies. He spent hours reviewing the security footage, his eyes glued to the screen as he watched the bubbles drift aimlessly through the hallway. He rewound and fast-forwarded, zooming in on every detail, searching for clues. He was like a detective obsessed with solving the world's most trivial mystery. I watched him from my peephole, barely able to contain my laughter. He was so engrossed in his investigation that he didn't even notice me peeking out at him. He paced back and forth, muttering to himself about bubble conspiracies and breaches of hallway etiquette. The bubble incident solidified the prank's legendary status within the building. My neighbors began to contribute their own subtle touches. Small, whimsical objects began appearing in my window. Mrs. Higgins even knitted a tiny scarf for Danny. I added the scarf to Danny's ensemble. Mr. Henderson valued order and predictability. The other tenants started leaving small gifts for Danny. Danny had become the building's unofficial mascot. Emboldened by the support of my neighbors, I decided to escalate the prank. I ordered a custom-made cardboard cutout of Arnold Schwarzenegger, Danny DeVito's co-star in the movie Twins. I positioned Arnold next to Danny in the window, creating a miniature celebrity reunion. Mr. Henderson's reaction was, as expected, priceless. He nearly fainted when he saw the two cardboard celebrities standing side by side in my window. He stumbled backwards, clutching his chest as if he'd seen a ghost. He stared at the cutouts, his eyes wide with disbelief. He called an emergency tenants meeting, his voice trembling as he announced that the building was being infiltrated by unauthorized cardboard individuals. He demanded to know who was responsible for this outrageous act of disrespect. He even threatened to call the police. I sat in the back of the room trying to keep a straight face. My neighbors, bless their mischievous souls, were equally amused. We exchanged knowing glances, barely able to contain our laughter. Mr. Henderson was losing it, and the prank was about to go viral. Someone, bless their anonymous heart, leaked the story to the local news. A picture of Danny and Arnold in my window, along with a blurry shot of Mr. Henderson looking bewildered, appeared on the evening news. The headline read, "Landlord Battles Cardboard Invaders." It was pure gold. The story quickly went viral. Pictures of Danny and Arnold started popping up everywhere. Memes were created. Hashtags were trending. My apartment building became a local landmark. People would drive by, slowing down to take pictures of the cardboard celebrities in my window. My phone started ringing off the hook. Reporters wanted interviews. Talk shows wanted me to appear as a guest. Even Danny DeVito's publicist reached out, expressing amusement at the whole situation. It was surreal. My little prank had become a national sensation. Mr. Henderson, however, was not amused. He became a recluse, rarely venturing out of his apartment. He avoided eye contact with the other tenants. He seemed to have aged 10 years in the span of a week. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But the sheer absurdity of it all was still too funny. Mr. Henderson's retreat from public life was complete. He stopped holding tenants' meetings. He stopped leaving passive-aggressive notes on people's doors. He even stopped patrolling the hallway with his clipboard. He became a ghost, a shadow of his former, overzealous self. I tried to apologize to him once, but he just waved me away, muttering something about the indignity of it all. He seemed genuinely hurt, not by the prank itself, but by the public humiliation that followed. I felt a pang of guilt. Maybe I had gone too far. The building, however, thrived in his absence. The other tenants, freed from his watchful eye, started to socialize more. Hallway gatherings became a regular occurrence. Mrs. Higgins even started a weekly knitting circle. It was as if Mr. Henderson's overbearing presence had been stifling the building's social life. The bubble machines, now a permanent fixture in the hallway, continued to churn out their whimsical creations. The hallway remained a vibrant, bubbly wonderland. It was a constant reminder of the prank, a symbol of our collective victory over the tyranny of overprotective landlordism. After a few weeks, the media frenzy died down. The reporters moved on to other stories. Life in the building returned to normal. Mr. Henderson eventually emerged, a little grayer and quieter. He started saying hello to the other tenants again. The other tenants never let him forget. They left small, whimsical gifts for Danny and Arnold. I eventually moved out, taking Danny and Arnold with me. The dust settled, the bubbles popped, and life returned to a semblance of normalcy. Mr. Henderson never quite recovered from the great cardboard caper of 2024. He even started wearing Hawaiian shirts on casual Fridays. The security cameras remained. They became a running joke among the tenants. We'd wave at them occasionally. I moved out a few months later, taking Danny and Arnold with me. They're a conversation starter, a reminder of a simpler time. Tu si Madia. Looking back, the whole thing was utterly ridiculous. A grown man pranking his landlord with a cardboard cutout. It was childish, immature, and absolutely brilliant. Sometimes you just need to embrace the absurd. The prank taught me a few valuable lessons. Laughter is contagious. It brings people together. It can turn a stuffy old apartment building into a vibrant community. Never underestimate the power of a cardboard cutout. They can be more than just decorations. They can be symbols of rebellion. They can be catalysts for change. They can even be the downfall of an overprotective landlord. And finally, never underestimate the power of bubbles. They can transform a mundane hallway into a magical wonderland. They can confuse and bewilder even the most vigilant of landlords. And they can bring a whole lot of joy to a world that often takes itself too seriously. The Great Cardboard Caper of 2024 may have been a silly prank, but it was a prank with a purpose. It reminded us all to not take life too seriously, to embrace the absurd, and to always have a bubble machine handy, just in case.